She taught third-grade mathematics in room 14B, wore floral dresses and wire-rimmed glasses, and never raised her voice above a whisper. The children called her Miss Sarah. Their parents praised her patience, and the school board renewed her contract year after year without question. She was by all accounts perfectly ordinary. What they didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had once held a different kind of classroom, one where a single miscalculation meant death, where the only test scores that mattered were measured in heartbeats, and where she had never, not once in 847 confirmed shots, missed her target. But on a quiet Tuesday morning in October, when 3 black SUVs pulled into the school parking lot and men in dark suits began asking questions about the teacher in room 14B, Sarah's carefully constructed world of multiplication tables and parent-teacher conferences was about to collide with a past she had spent 8 years trying to forget. Welcome to Beneath Words Stories. Before we begin this tale of hidden identities, deadly skills, and the price of leaving shadows behind, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep these voices alive. Sarah Mitchell arrived at Riverside Elementary at exactly 7:15 every morning, 30 minutes before the first bell. She unlocked room 14B with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else in her carefully ordered life. Coffee first, black, no sugar. Lesson plans arranged on her desk in perfect rows. Whiteboard markers tested for ink flow. Everything in its place. The children began filtering in at 7:45, backpacks heavy with homework and dreams. 8-year-olds with gap-toothed smiles and sticky fingers, each one a small universe of questions and wonder. Sarah greeted them with the same gentle smile she had perfected over 8 years of teaching, the same patient voice that made even the most anxious child feel safe in her presence. "Good morning, class," she would say, her voice carrying just enough warmth to settle their restless energy. "Today we're going to discover something amazing about numbers." Mrs. Henderson, the principal, often used Sarah as an example during staff meetings. "Look at Miss Mitchell's classroom management," she would say. "Never a raised voice, never a problem child. She has this way of seeing what each student needs." What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that Sarah's ability to read people, to detect micro-expressions, to sense tension before it escalated, to know exactly when someone was lying, had been honed in places where such skills meant the difference between completing a mission and never coming home. During lunch, while other teachers gathered in the faculty lounge to share gossip and gripe about difficult parents, Sarah would slip away to the empty gym. She told anyone who asked that she was grading papers, but the truth was more complicated. In the silence of that echoing space, she would practice breathing exercises learned in a different life, exercises designed to slow a heartbeat to almost nothing, to still the mind before taking a shot that might end a war or save a dozen lives. Sometimes, when the October wind rattled the windows of room 14B, Sarah's hand would drift unconsciously to her left shoulder, where a scar from shrapnel still pulled tight when storms approached. The children never noticed. Children rarely saw what adults work so hard to hide. But Sarah felt it, a reminder of nights spent in desert mountains, of radio calls that came in the dark, of targets that had names and families, and reasons for dying that were above her clearance level. Her apartment reflected the same careful normalcy as her classroom. Floral patterns and soft lighting, pedagogical books neatly shelved, lesson plans color-coded by subject. But in the bedroom closet, behind winter coats and storage boxes, a locked case contained items that told a different story. Night vision optics, range-finding equipment, and a disassembled rifle that could put a bullet through a target at distances most people couldn't accurately point. 8 years. 8 years of parent conferences and spelling tests, of playground duty and standardized assessments. 8 years of being exactly what she appeared to be. Nothing more, nothing less. Sarah had almost convinced herself that the woman who could calculate wind drift in her sleep and adjust for atmospheric pressure by instinct was someone she used to be, not someone she still was. But the past, Sarah had learned, was never as buried as you hoped it would be. The black SUVs arrived during second period, sliding into the visitor parking spaces with the kind of precision that immediately caught Sarah's attention. She was helping Tommy Chen work through a long division problem when movement in her peripheral vision made her pause. Through the window of room 14B, she watched 3 vehicles disgorge men in dark suits, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of training, of purpose, of trouble. Sarah's hand tightened imperceptibly on her red pen. 8 years of teaching had taught her to maintain composure under pressure, crying children, angry parents, administrative chaos. But this was different. This pressure had weight to it. the kind that pressed against your chest and made your training kick in whether you wanted it to or not. Miss Sarah? Tommy's voice brought her back to the classroom. Did I do this right? She looked down at his worksheet, forcing her breathing to remain steady. That's perfect, Tommy. You're getting really good at this. But her eyes drifted back to the window. The men weren't moving like school administrators or education officials. They moved like operators, like people who understood that corners were dangerous and that positioning mattered. One stayed by the vehicles, scanning the surroundings. Two others headed toward the main office, their gait suggesting they were carrying more than identification in their jacket pockets. Sarah's mind began calculating automatically exit routes from the classroom, defensive positions, civilian safety protocols. Then she caught herself. This was Riverside Elementary, not a forward operating base. These were third graders working on multiplication tables, not potential casualties in a tactical situation. But old instincts died hard, and some instincts were designed to keep you alive. Mrs. Henderson's voice crackled over the intercom 15 minutes later. Miss Mitchell, could you please send a student to cover your class? You're needed in the office. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. In 8 years of teaching, she had never been called to the office unexpectedly. Her performance reviews were spotless, her conduct beyond reproach, her background check as clean as government clearances could make it. Emma, she said to her most responsible student, I need you to be the teacher for a few minutes. Make sure everyone keeps working on page 47. The walk to the main office felt longer than it should have. Sarah's feet wanted to move faster, her body responding to threat indicators her conscious mind was still processing. But she maintained the careful pace of an elementary school teacher, nodding to other faculty members, smiling at passing students, giving no indication that every nerve in her body was suddenly alive with possibilities she had spent 8 years trying to forget. The men were waiting in Mrs. Henderson's office, 2 of them, just as Sarah had observed from her classroom window. Mrs. Henderson sat behind her desk, looking confused and slightly irritated, the expression of someone who didn't like having her carefully planned day disrupted by unexpected visitors. Miss Mitchell, Mrs. Henderson said as Sarah entered, these gentlemen are from the Department of Education. They have some questions about your certification records. Sarah nodded politely, but her eyes were already cataloging details. The first man was mid-40s, military bearing barely concealed beneath a civilian suit that fit too well to be off the rack. His shoes were polished but practical, his haircut regulation short. The second was younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of alertness that came from active fieldwork rather than desk duty. Neither looked like they had ever spent a day working in education. Miss Mitchell, the older man said, extending his hand. Agent Reeves, Department of Education's Special Investigations Unit. This is Agent Chen. We'd like to speak with you privately about some discrepancies in your employment records. Sarah shook his hand, noting the calluses on his trigger finger, the slight bulge under his left armpit that suggested a shoulder holster. Of course, she said, her voice carrying the same patient tone she used with anxious third graders. Though I'm not sure what discrepancies there could be. My certification is current, and all my background checks were completed before I started here. Mrs. Henderson stood up, clearly uncomfortable. I'll give you the conference room. Take all the time you need. As they walked down the hall, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Her cover had been meticulous, her transition to civilian life carefully orchestrated by people who understood the importance of making former assets invisible. Sarah Mitchell, the teacher, existed in every database that mattered. Her history clean and unremarkable, but someone, somewhere, had connected dots that were never supposed to form a line back to her. The conference room at Riverside Elementary was designed for parent meetings and faculty discussions, not interrogations. Cheerful bulletin boards lined the walls, displaying student artwork and motivational posters. A coffee-stained table sat in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs that had seen better decades. It was the kind of room where the most serious conversation usually involved concerns about reading levels or behavioral issues. Agent Reeves closed the door and activated a small device that Sarah recognized as a white noise generator. Professional grade, not the kind of equipment the Department of Education typically carried. Miss Mitchell, Agent Chen began, opening a manila folder. We're going to need you to walk us through your employment history prior to coming to Riverside Elementary. Sarah folded her hands in her lap, maintaining the posture of a concerned but cooperative teacher. Certainly. I student taught in Denver, then worked at Mountain View Elementary for 2 years before moving here. All of that should be in my personnel file. It is, Reeves said. Very thorough documentation. Almost too thorough, if you know what to look for. Sarah felt her pulse quicken but kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure I understand. Chen slid a photograph across the table. It was grainy, taken with a long lens, but unmistakably Sarah from 6 years ago. She was younger, harder looking, wearing desert camouflage and carrying equipment that definitely wasn't used for teaching multiplication. This was taken at a forward operating base in Afghanistan, Chen said. The person in this photograph goes by the call sign Phoenix, specialized in long-range reconnaissance and elimination, credited with over 800 confirmed kills across multiple theaters of operation. Sarah looked at the photograph without flinching, though her mind was racing. The photo existed, which meant someone had broken protocol. Someone with access to classified materials had made a connection they weren't supposed to make. I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady. I don't see how this concerns me. I've been teaching elementary school for 8 years. Reeves leaned forward. Sarah Mitchell, the teacher, started existing exactly 8 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago. Before that, there's no trace of her. No college transcripts, no employment records, no social media presence. It's like she materialized fully formed with a teaching degree and impeccable references. People change careers, Sarah said. Maybe I wasn't always sure what I wanted to do with my life. People change careers, Chen agreed. But they don't usually have their old lives completely scrubbed from existence by military intelligence services. That takes resources, Miss Mitchell, and it takes a very good reason. Sarah sat in silence, weighing options. Denial was still possible. The photograph was circumstantial, and her cover identity had been crafted by professionals. But these men hadn't come here on speculation. They had information, and they were fishing for confirmation. The question was, who had sent them, and what did they want? Let's assume for a moment, she said carefully, that your theory is correct. What would 2 agents who definitely aren't from the Department of Education want with an elementary school teacher? Reeves smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. There it is, the first crack in the facade. We're CIA, Chen said bluntly, and we need Phoenix back. Sarah felt the carefully constructed walls of her civilian life beginning to crumble. Phoenix. She hadn't heard that call sign spoken aloud in 8 years. It belonged to someone else, someone who existed in classified files and redacted reports, someone who had been officially declared dead in a helicopter crash that never happened. Phoenix is dead, Sarah said quietly. She died in Afghanistan 8 years ago. There's a grave marker at Arlington to prove it. Phoenix, the operator, is dead, Reeves agreed. But Sarah Mitchell, the teacher, has skills we need. Skills that don't fade, even after 8 years of parent conferences and spelling tests. I don't know what you're talking about. Chen opened another folder, this one thicker, more official. 6 months ago, a Russian sleeper cell activated in the Pacific Northwest. Deep cover agents who've been in place for over a decade, waiting for orders. 3 weeks ago, they received those orders. He slid a series of surveillance photographs across the table. Men and women who looked like ordinary Americans. An accountant, a software engineer, a real estate agent, a nurse. People who could be neighbors, co-workers, friends. They're planning something big, Reeves continued. Our intelligence suggests it's an assassination plot targeting a high-value individual who will be visiting Seattle next month, someone whose death would destabilize entire regions. Sarah looked at the photographs without touching them. And you think I can help you stop them? We know you can, Chen said, because their cell leader is someone you've met before. He slid one final photograph across the table, and Sarah's blood went cold. The man in the image was older than when she'd last seen him, grayer, but the eyes were unmistakable. Cold, intelligent, patient. She had spent 3 months tracking him through the mountains of Afghanistan, 3 months learning his patterns, his security protocols, his weaknesses. She had finally gotten him in her crosshairs on a windy November morning, had controlled her breathing, calculated the distance and wind drift, and squeezed the trigger. The shot had been perfect. It should have killed him instantly, but the body they'd recovered hadn't been his. A decoy, a double, while the real target slipped away in the confusion that followed. It had been the only miss of Phoenix's career, the one failure that had haunted her through her final months of service. Viktor Kozlov, she whispered. Very much alive, Reeves confirmed, and very much planning something that will make 9/11 look like a minor inconvenience. We've been tracking this cell for months, but they're too good, too careful. Every time we get close, they disappear. What makes you think I can do what an entire CIA task force can't? Chen leaned back in his chair. Because Kozlov knows about Phoenix. He's been watching for her to surface ever since Afghanistan. Our intelligence suggests he's actually been tracking the identities of former military assets, looking for his old nemesis. He knows Phoenix is out there somewhere, and he's getting sloppy because he wants the rematch. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a familiar stirring she had spent 8 years suppressing. The thrill of the hunt, the clarity that came with having a target, the cold satisfaction of knowing that somewhere out there was a problem that could be solved with the right bullet tablet, placed at exactly the right time. But then she thought of Tommy Chen struggling with long division, of Emma's proud smile when she solved a difficult word problem, of the trust in 22 pairs of 8-year-old eyes that looked to her for guidance and safety. "I have a life here," she said. "Students who depend on me. I'm not Phoenix anymore." "Phoenix never really left, did she?" Reeves asked quietly. "Every morning when you practice breathing exercises in the empty gym, every time you unconsciously scan exits when you enter a room, every time you watch those black SUVs arrive and calculate threat assessments instead of wondering if they're lost parents." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs scattered across the conference room table. Faces from two different worlds, the sleeper agents who threatened innocent lives and her own past staring back at her in desert camouflage. "If I say yes," she said finally, "what happens to Sarah Mitchell, the teacher?" "That depends," Chen replied, "on whether Phoenix can finish what she started 8 years ago." The rest of the school day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Sarah returned to room 14B and helped her students work through fraction problems, her voice steady and encouraging while her mind processed everything she had learned in that conference room. The agents had left her with a phone number and 24 hours to decide, disappearing as quietly as they had arrived. But Sarah knew her decision had already been made the moment she saw Viktor Kozlov's photograph. After the final bell rang and the children scattered to buses and waiting parents, Sarah sat alone in her empty classroom, surrounded by the detritus of third-grade learning. Crumpled worksheets, broken crayons, the lingering smell of grape juice and childhood dreams. On her desk, beside a stack of math tests waiting to be graded, lay the business card Agent Reeves had left behind. No agency logo, no official title, just a phone number and a name that probably wasn't real. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Sarah, is everything all right?" Those men from the Department of Education looked quite serious. "Just some paperwork issues," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." "Good. You know, I've been meaning to tell you, your classroom management techniques would make an excellent presentation at the state conference next spring. The way you handle difficult situations, it's like you have this sixth sense about people." Sarah nodded absently, her fingers tracing the edge of the business card. "I might not be available for conferences next spring." Mrs. Henderson frowned. "Oh? Are you thinking of taking some time off? You certainly deserve it. You haven't missed a single day in 8 years. 8 years. 8 years of perfect attendance, perfect performance reviews, perfect integration into a world that had never known who she really was." Sarah looked around the classroom that had become her sanctuary. The multiplication charts she had laminated herself, the reading corner where struggling students had discovered the magic of words, the photos from field trips and holiday parties where she smiled alongside children who had never seen her with a rifle in her hands. "I might be taking an extended leave," Sarah said quietly. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with a glass of wine she didn't drink and a decision she had already made. The locked case in her bedroom closet called to her like a siren song, filled with equipment she hadn't touched in 8 years but could still assemble blindfolded. Muscle memory was a cruel thing. It never forgot, even when the mind desperately wanted to. She thought about Tommy Chen, who had finally mastered long division after weeks of patient tutoring. About Emma Rodriguez, who had overcome her fear of speaking in class to become one of the brightest students Sarah had ever taught. About Marcus Johnson, whose behavior problems had disappeared once Sarah had realized he wasn't acting out. He was protecting his younger sister from bullies on the playground. These children had given her purpose, had filled a void she hadn't known existed until she'd found herself in front of a chalkboard instead of behind a rifle scope. They had made her human again in ways that 8 years of therapy and debriefing never could. But out there in the darkness, Viktor Kozlov was planning something that would create more orphans, more broken families, more children who would never feel safe again. And Sarah was the only one who had gotten close enough to him to understand how he thought, how he moved, what he feared. She picked up the business card and dialed the number. "Reeves. I have conditions," Sarah said without preamble. "I'm listening. My students don't know anything about this. As far as they're concerned, Miss Mitchell had a family emergency and had to take leave. Mrs. Henderson gets a story about caring for a sick relative. No one at that school ever learns the truth about who I was. Done. I work alone. No partners, no backup team unless I specifically request it. I know Kozlov's patterns better than anyone on your payroll, and I won't have some fresh-faced agent compromising the operation because they don't understand the stakes." Agreed. "And when this is over, really over, Sarah Mitchell comes back to room 14B. Not transferred, not reassigned, not quietly retired. She comes back to teach 3rd grade like none of this ever happened." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That might not be possible. Once Kozlov knows Phoenix is active again, your cover identity becomes compromised. Other enemies might surface. Then you'd better make sure those enemies never get the chance, Sarah said coldly. Because I'm not abandoning those children permanently. They've lost enough people in their lives. We'll do our best. Your best isn't good enough. I want guarantees, backed by documentation that goes all the way to the director's office. Sarah Mitchell's life is protected, or Phoenix doesn't come back. Another pause. It'll take some time to arrange. You have until tomorrow morning. I'll be in room 14B at 7:15, like always. If the paperwork isn't ready, I spend the day teaching fractions, and you find another way to stop Kozlov. She hung up without waiting for a response. That night, Sarah opened the locked case for the first time in 8 years. The contents were exactly as she had left them, cleaned, maintained, and waiting. She lifted out the disassembled rifle, her hands moving automatically through the familiar process of inspection and assembly. The weight felt right in her hands, balanced and purposeful in a way that red pens and lesson plans never could be. But when she looked through the scope, all she saw was the wall of her bedroom, decorated with thank you cards from former students and photos from classroom celebrations. Two worlds, impossibly different, somehow occupying the same space in her life. Phoenix the sniper could put a bullet through a target at impossible distances. Sarah Mitchell the teacher could put knowledge into young minds and watch them grow. Both required patience, precision, and the ability to see possibilities that others missed. The question was whether one person could be both without losing herself entirely. Sarah turned back to face them, her expression calm but determined. Then you'd better find me someone good, because Viktor Kozlov has spent 8 years planning his revenge, and I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of making it easy. Outside the safe house windows, Seattle's skyline glittered in the distance, 22 miles of urban terrain where a killer waited in shadows that seemed ordinary and harmless. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Viktor Kozlov was making his own preparations, checking his own equipment, planning his own perfect shot. The hunt that had begun 8 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan was about to resume in the coffee shops and office buildings of the Pacific Northwest. Only this time, Phoenix wouldn't be protecting distant allies or eliminating strategic targets. This time, she would be protecting the children in room 14B at Riverside Elementary and the millions of other children who deserved to grow up in a world where their teachers came back from leave and their worst fears were nothing more than pop quizzes and playground bullies. The war was coming home, but Phoenix was ready for it. Sarah Mitchell had been a good teacher, patient and kind and loved by her students. But Phoenix had been something else entirely. Precise, deadly, and absolutely relentless in pursuit of her targets. It was time to remember which one she needed to be.